August 14, 2001. Fairbanks, Alaska. The sun never truly set that summer night, lingering low on the horizon with an eerie golden glow. Daniel Whitaker, 26, and his girlfriend, Sarah Miller, 24th, had spent weeks planning their road trip through the last frontier. Both were college graduates from Oregon, adventurous, restless, and eager to escape the weight of routine. Their plan was simple: drive the Dalton Highway north toward the Arctic Circle, camp along the way, and document the wilderness for Sarah's photography portfolio. Friends said they wanted to see a world untouched by concrete, to chase the kind of raw freedom Alaska promised. They left Fairbanks in Daniel's green Ford F-150, fully stocked with food, camping gear, maps, and a camera that Sarah carried everywhere. At a small gas station near Live and Good, the last reliable stop before the road turned desolate, they fueled up, joked with the attendant, and drove off into the vast nothingness. That was the last confirmed sighting of Daniel and Sarah alive. 4 days later, when the couple failed to call home as planned, Daniel's parents contacted Alaska State Troopers. Searchers were dispatched along the Dalton Highway. On August 19th, troopers spotted the truck abandoned on a gravel pull-off 30 miles past Coldfoot. The doors were unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. The couple's backpacks were inside, untouched. On the passenger seat, Sarah's camera sat with a half-finished roll of film. The truck showed no signs of damage or struggle. There were no footprints in the surrounding dirt. It was as though the couple had simply vanished into thin air. Within hours, helicopters swept the tundra. Volunteers on ATVs scoured trails. Dogs attempted to pick up a scent but lost it quickly in the wind. For days, searchers covered miles of wilderness, calling out their names into valleys that swallowed sound. The land was both breathtaking and merciless. Rolling tundra, jagged peaks, rivers of glacial melt. No trace of Daniel or Sarah was found. No clothing, no gear, no bodies. The only mark they left behind was the truck, sitting silent against the endless backdrop of green and ice. Troopers weighed the obvious explanations first. Animal attack? Alaska is home to grizzlies, wolves, and moose. But such attacks rarely leave nothing. No blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks. Got lost hiking. Possible, but with no footprints and gear still in the truck, it seemed unlikely. Foul play? The Dalton Highway has a reputation. Truckers, drifters, and dangerous loners passed through, but no signs of violence surfaced. Their families clung to the hope they were still alive, injured, or lost. Yet as days turned to weeks, hope thinned. Daniel's father, Robert Whitaker, flew to Alaska immediately. It didn't make sense, he told reporters. My son doesn't just walk away from his truck. If they left it, something forced them to. Sarah's mother, Elaine, stood at the roadside where the truck was found, staring into the horizon. It feels like the earth just swallowed them, she whispered. The families campaigned for extended searches, but after 2 weeks with no sign, the official effort was scaled back. Alaska had claimed 2 more souls. Years passed. The case grew cold, filed away among the countless disappearances in Alaska's vast wilderness. Between 1988 and 2005, more than 16,000 people were reported missing in the state. Some were found alive. Some were not found at all. Daniel and Sarah became part of that haunting statistic. Their names lingered in databases, their faces printed on fading posters. But the world moved on. For their families, time did not heal. Robert Whitaker became consumed, flying to Alaska every summer to search on his own. Elaine Miller kept Sarah's room exactly as it was, as if her daughter might walk back through the door at any moment. No answers came. It wasn't until 2021, 20 years later, that the silence broke. 2 hikers exploring a remote glacier north of Coldfoot stumbled upon something protruding from the ice. At first it looked like an animal carcass, but as they drew closer, they realized it was human. 2 humans, encased in clear ancient ice, side by side with the perfectly preserved bodies of Daniel Whitaker and Sarah Miller. Their faces were pale but intact, eyes closed as if asleep. Their clothing was untouched, frozen in plastic, same jackets and jeans they wore the day they vanished. The hikers fled in shock, calling troopers immediately. Within hours, the site was secured. Photographs taken that day would later leak online, igniting a firestorm of morbid fascination. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How did they end up in the glacier? There was no evidence of trauma, no broken bones, no blood. Their frozen expressions appeared calm, not terrified. Their bodies were found lying side by side, as though placed there. Experts suggested they may have fallen into a hidden crevasse, trapped by shifting ice, preserved by sub-zero temperatures. But skeptics pointed out the odd details: the lack of panic in their posture, the absence of gear, the almost deliberate positioning of their bodies. Conspiracy theories exploded. Were they murdered and hidden in the ice? Did they stumble onto something forbidden in the wilderness? Was their preservation too perfect to be natural? The wilderness had given them back, but not the truth. The image of Daniel and Sarah, frozen in ice like statues of a tragedy, spread across the world. For their families, it was both relief and torment. The search was over, yet the mystery deepened. As Elaine Miller said in an interview, holding her daughter's recovered camera, "We finally found them. But we'll never know why the ice chose to keep them so long or why it let them go now." And with that, Alaska's frozen silence grew heavier still. We move into the aftermath of the discovery: autopsies, forensic analysis, family reactions, conspiracy theories, and the way the find reignited the case with more questions than answers. 2021. The discovery goes public. The photograph leaked before the authorities were ready. A blurry cell phone image shared first in an Alaskan hiking forum, then reposted across social media. Within 24 hours, the world had seen the impossible. Two bodies, side by side, preserved in flawless clarity beneath a sheet of ice. The faces were unmistakable. Daniel Whitaker and Sarah Miller, missing since 2001, frozen for 2 decades, yet looking no older than the day they disappeared. The photo ignited a storm. News crews swarmed Fairbanks. True crime podcasters and YouTubers uploaded hurried episodes with breathless titles. Frozen lovers found after 20 years. Alaska's ice tomb mystery. Forensic anthropologists were flown in. Politicians demanded answers. For the families, the discovery was not closure. It was another wound. On August 19th, 2021, exact anniversary of their truck's discovery 20 years earlier, recovery teams used heated saws to carve the bodies from the glacier. The process took 2 days, overseen by state troopers, forensic pathologists, and FBI observers. When the blocks of ice finally gave way, revealing Daniel and Sarah in full, the air around the site turned reverent. One witness described it as like watching time stand still, like they'd been waiting. Their clothing was intact. Jeans stiff with frost, jackets zipped up to their throats, hiking boots frozen in place. Sarah still wore the silver bracelet her mother had given her before the trip. Daniel's watch was stopped at 2:17. Inside the ice, they appeared almost peaceful. At the state medical examiner's office in Anchorage, autopsies began. Families were told to prepare for long delays. Thawing and preserving evidence from frozen remains is delicate work. The results, when they came, only deepened the mystery. No signs of trauma. No broken bones, no bullet wounds, no knife marks, no signs of animal predation. Clothing was untouched, flesh intact. Cause of death undetermined. Both bodies showed evidence of hypothermia, but not enough to explain everything. Toxicology revealed no drugs or alcohol. There were no defensive wounds, no evidence of struggle. It was as if the couple had simply lain down in the ice and gone to sleep. One pathologist described the findings as incongruous with the environment. Normally, hypothermia victims are found disoriented, with clothing scattered from paradoxical undressing. Daniel and Sarah, by contrast, were neatly dressed, side by side, as though arranged. The official report offered little beyond speculation. Probable environmental exposure, circumstances unknown. For Robert Whitaker, the recovery confirmed his darkest suspicions. Standing before cameras outside the medical examiner's office, he said, "My son didn't freeze to death by accident. Something or someone put them there. We've waited 20 years for answers, and all we get are more questions. Elaine Miller, Sarah's mother, reacted differently. She clutched her daughter's bracelet during interviews, her voice shaking. She looks like she's been asleep all this time, like she could wake up. I don't understand it, but I know she's home now. That's all that matters. Behind the cameras, the two families clashed. Robert pressed investigators for foul play theories, while Elaine begged the media to stop sensationalizing. Grief fractured them as much as the ice had preserved their children. The frozen discovery became fertile ground for speculation. 1. The glacier fall theory experts suggested the couple fell into a hidden crevasse during a hike, their bodies sealed in by shifting ice and snow. Over decades, the glacier slowly released them. Logical, but critics asked, why were they side by side, not separated by movement? 2. The murder concealment theory. Online sleuths argued someone placed them deliberately in the ice. The peaceful positioning, intact clothing, and watch stopped at an odd hour fueled suspicion. But how could killers transport and hide bodies deep in a glacier without leaving evidence? 3. The paranormal theory fringe communities leaned into the eerie details, the preservation, the timing of their reappearance on the anniversary, the calm expressions. Some whispered about the Alaska Triangle, a stretch of wilderness infamous for vanishings. The lack of definitive answers allowed every theory to thrive. When Sarah's frozen camera was recovered, hope soared that the film might reveal their last moments. Technicians carefully thought it, frame by frame, under controlled conditions. What developed were fragments, half-faded images of mountains, tundra, and blurred shots of Daniel laughing. The final frame was the most haunting. A tilted photo of white nothingness, as if aimed at a blizzard or a blank sky. No people, no landmarks, just whiteness. It offered no answers, only unease. With the discovery, the Alaska State Troopers officially reopened the case. New interviews were conducted with the gas station attendant who last saw them, with truckers who remembered their vehicle, with locals who recalled rumors in 2001. But memories after 20 years were unreliable. Witnesses contradicted each other. Some swore they'd seen the couple days after their disappearance. Others denied ever hearing their names until now. The trail, like the glacier itself, remained frozen. In Fairbanks and along the Dalton Highway, locals reacted with a mix of fascination and unease. For many, the discovery turned an old ghost story into something tangible. At the Coldfoot truck stop, where Daniel and Sarah likely passed through, a waitress told reporters, "We always said the wilderness swallowed them. Now it feels like it spit them back out." Tourists flocked to the area, drawn by the macabre allure. Hikers left flowers near the site of the glacier. Some treated it as a shrine, others as a spectacle. Residents resented the sudden attention. They weren't legends. One local said, "They were people. And they died out here." That's nothing to gawk at. Despite international coverage, the investigation stalled again within months. The ice had given them back, but not the truth. The official file closed with the same words it opened, with 20 years earlier. Missing, presumed deceased. Cause undetermined. Robert Whitaker refused to accept it. He hired private investigators, flew drones over the glacier, and demanded federal intervention. But each new effort ended where the last began, in silence. Elaine Miller, by contrast, withdrew. She buried Sarah beside her grandparents, a simple headstone etched with the words, "At last we know." Yet even she admitted, quietly, "I don't understand how they were found like that. It doesn't make sense. But I can't live in the questions anymore." The frozen bodies of Daniel and Sarah should have brought resolution. Instead, they reignited the mystery. How had they ended up preserved so perfectly, side by side, untouched by time? Why did the glacier reveal them on the exact anniversary of their disappearance? As one investigator admitted off record, sometimes the wilderness doesn't give answers. It just gives you back the bodies. And the silence in between is the part that keeps you awake at night. We shift into the family's unraveling obsessions, the media circus, and how the case twists into myth while hidden tensions and strange inconsistencies surface in the old timeline. Fall 2021. After the glacier gave them back, the discovery of Daniel Whitaker and Sarah Miller's frozen remains should have been the ending. For most missing person cases, bodies meant closure. Funerals could be held, death certificates signed. Families at last given something solid to grieve. But for Daniel's father Robert and Sarah's mother Elaine, the discovery was not an ending. It was the beginning of a deeper torment. Cable news channels aired specials with chilling titles: Frozen in Time, Glacier's Secret, The Lovers in Ice. Talk shows invited forensic experts who debated whether the preservation was natural or staged. Podcasters reconstructed the couple's last days, speculating endlessly about the truck, the missing footprints, and Sarah's final camera frame. And in the age of social media, the story went viral. Memes circulated Daniel and Sarah as the ice lovers, compared to fairy tale figures trapped in a frozen sleep. TikTok creators spun theories about the Alaska Triangle, UFO abductions, and hidden military experiments. For the families, it was unbearable. Their children were not myths. They were people, yet the world consumed them as spectacle. Robert Whitaker became the most vocal critic of the investigation. He gave interviews where his voice shook with fury. "Don't you see? This wasn't an accident. My son didn't just lie down in a glacier. Somebody put him there." And 20 years later, the ice is hiding the truth. He accused the Alaska state troopers of incompetence. He accused the FBI of indifference. At press conferences, he held up photos of Daniel's frozen body, demanding explanations for the calm posture, the untouched clothing, the stopped watch. Privately, he hired 2 independent investigators. Both returned the same conclusion: undetermined. Neither could disprove nor prove foul play. The ambiguity drove Robert deeper into obsession. He began compiling binders of theory struckers, hermits, rogue survivalists, even fellow hikers who might have crossed paths with the couple. Every lead, no matter how thin, was catalogued. Elaine Miller, by contrast, recoiled from the spotlight. After the funeral, she withdrew from interviews, declining documentary requests. Her daughter's bracelet remained on her wrist, but she refused to look at the glacier photos. "I want to remember her warm," she said, "not frozen." While Robert stormed at cameras, Elaine sat quietly in Sarah's room, thumbing through photo albums. Friends who visited her home described it as a shrine. Pictures on every wall, candles lit by the bed. Sarah's journals laid open on the desk. Elaine clung to the notion of acceptance. The wilderness took her. Now it gave her back. That's all I'll ever know. But grief twisted acceptance into fragility. Neighbors heard her speaking aloud to Sarah's photograph. Once, a visitor found her asleep in the bed she had kept untouched for 20 years. In Fairbanks and along the Dalton Highway, locals grew weary of the renewed attention. Reporters filled diners, drilling residents for recollections of 2001. Tourists flocked to the pull-off where the truck was found, snapping selfies beside the informational plaque hastily erected by the state. Some locals bristled. A trucker told one journalist, "This isn't a ghost story. People disappear out here all the time. They just happen to come back looking pretty. Most don't." Others leaned into the legend. A bar in Coldfoot began selling cocktails called the Ice Lovers. Hikers left flowers and notes near the glacier, turning it into a macabre attraction. For the Whitakers and Millers, the commercialization of tragedy was another wound. "They were our kids," Robert snapped when shown a novelty t-shirt bearing Daniel and Sarah's faces. Not folklore. As attention swelled, armchair detectives began re-examining the timeline. Online forums dissected every detail. Why was the truck left unlocked with the keys still in the ignition? Why were no footprints found nearby, despite soft gravel and tundra? Why did Sarah's camera end with a blank white frame? What was she pointing at? Why did Daniel's watch stop at exactly 2:17? Some pointed to overlooked witness statements. A trucker in 2001 claimed he saw a green Ford F-150 pulled over near the Yukon River Bridge, with two figures arguing outside. Troopers dismissed it at the time as unreliable. Now, the detail resurfaced like a ghost. Another claimed he saw a young woman resembling Sarah at a gas station days after their supposed disappearance. Again dismissed. Again revived. The inconsistencies multiplied, feeding Robert's conviction and eroding Elaine's fragile acceptance. Robert's second investigator, a former Anchorage detective named Michael Torres, became obsessed with one question. If they fell into the glacier, why together? Why perfectly preserved side by side? Torres interviewed glaciologists who explained how bodies move chaotically through ice, twisted and mangled by pressure. Daniel and Sarah showed none of that. He interviewed hunters who scoffed at the idea of untouched clothing. A bear would have shredded them. Wolves too. There'd be signs. There weren't. His conclusion was careful but damning. Natural explanations are possible, but improbable. Human involvement cannot be ruled out. Robert seized on the phrase, repeating it endlessly in interviews. Human involvement cannot be ruled out. The story's grip on the internet intensified. Subreddits dedicated to unsolved mysteries spawned threads with thousands of comments. YouTubers analyzed Sarah's photographs frame by frame, slowing the final white shot into abstract theories. TikTokers posted dramatized reenactments of the frozen discovery, racking up millions of views. Some used chilling music and captions like, "Would you sleep in the glacier forever?" For Robert, the internet was fuel. He joined forums under pseudonyms, arguing with strangers, sharing his theories late into the night. For Elaine, it was poison. She deleted her accounts, blocked reporters, and stopped answering calls. Two parents, grieving the same loss, pulled further apart with every passing day. By winter 2021, the case had transcended fact. It had become myth. In Alaska, where thousands vanish into wilderness each decade, Daniel and Sarah stood out not because they disappeared, but because they returned preserved, immaculate, like relics of some ancient ritual. Locals whispered of the ice choosing its own. Tourists described the glacier as cursed. Even investigators admitted, off record, that the preservation felt too clean. But myths do not give answers. They only deepen the questions. On the 20th anniversary of their disappearance, the glacier returned Daniel and Sarah. By the 21st, their story had fractured families, fueled conspiracies, and turned into folklore. For Robert, the case was a conspiracy waiting to be exposed. For Elaine, it was a wound too deep to probe. For the public, it was a riddle to be consumed, debated, and distorted. As one state trooper admitted quietly to a reporter, "We've got the bodies, sure. But sometimes that makes it worse, because now you can't stop asking why." And in Alaska, the why is what you'll never get. We go into the psychological unraveling how grief, obsession, and folklore eat away at both families and investigators, turning the mystery into something larger, darker, and more consuming than the truth itself. Winter 2022. When answers refused to come, snow covered Fairbanks in deep, unbroken sheets. Beneath it, Daniel and Sarah lay buried again, this time in cemeteries, not glaciers. But the ground could not contain the questions. For their families, the discovery had not silenced grief. It had sharpened it into something jagged, unrelenting. Robert Whittaker no longer spoke in calm sentences. His interviews were rambling, fueled by insomnia and anger. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands restless. He carried binders filled with maps, timelines, and theories. At one press conference, he slammed a binder on the podium so hard the microphone cracked. "This isn't nature. This isn't coincidence. This was deliberate. Somebody put them in that ice." When reporters asked who, Robert's answers shifted. Sometimes he blamed truckers, sometimes hermits, sometimes shadowy entities operating in Alaska's interior. He stopped caring how improbable he sounded. Those closest to him noticed the change. He drank more. He rarely slept. He drove north on weekends, alone, retracing the Dalton Highway, staring at the pull-off where the truck had been found. Locals reported seeing him wandering near the glacier site at night with a flashlight, muttering. His obsession became ritual. Each January, he marked the days on a calendar until August 19th, the anniversary of both the truck's discovery and the glacier's revelation. That date means something, he insisted to anyone who listened. It's not chance. Elaine Miller took the opposite path. She retreated so far inward that neighbors worried. Curtains drawn, phone unplugged, television off. Friends found her pacing at odd hours, clutching Sarah's old journal. She whispered aloud as if reading it back to her daughter. You love the stars. Remember? You wanted to see the northern lights. Did you see them, Sarah? Did you? When approached about participating in a documentary, she refused violently, slamming the door on the producer. Later, she admitted to her sister, they don't want Sarah. They want a story. She was not a story. She was my baby. Elaine began visiting Sarah's grave daily, regardless of weather. Snow piled to her knees, frost cut her face, but she stood there anyway. Once, in a blizzard, a neighbor spotted her kneeling in the cemetery, lips moving in prayer or conversation. Her grief hardened into ritual just as Robert's had, but hers was quieter, more brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. Even the Alaska state troopers assigned to the reopened case began to show strain. Detective Karen Fields admitted privately, it's the neatness of it. Hypothermia victims don't look peaceful. They thrash, they strip, they scatter. But those two side by side, untouched, it's like they agreed to lie down together. That's not how death works in the cold. Another investigator, speaking off record, confessed nightmares. Dreams of walking across the glacier at night and seeing hundreds of faces preserved beneath the ice, staring up at him. Some troopers asked to be reassigned, others buried themselves deeper, combing through old files, chasing down long-faded witness statements. The case infected them like a sickness-every theory collapsing under the weight of another unanswered question. In Fairbanks, residents argued over whether to embrace or reject the myth that outsiders had created. Some leaned into it, selling merchandise, giving ghost tours of the Dalton Highway. Others condemned the exploitation, saying the families deserved peace. But even those who dismissed the spectacle admitted unease. Hunters avoided the glacier. Truckers told each other not to stop at mile marker 174. Campers reported hearing strange cracks at night, like voices carried in the ice. What had once been a tragic disappearance was now a curse whispered across the tundra. Though united by grief, Robert and Elaine clashed bitterly. At a memorial event, Robert demanded investigations into cover-ups, while Elaine begged him to stop. You're keeping her in the ice, Elaine hissed afterward. You're not letting her rest. Rest? Robert shot back. She was murdered, Elaine. And you want to bury her twice. Their relationship, once fragile but shared, splintered completely. Robert stopped calling. Elaine stopped answering. Each became an island, orbiting grief in opposite directions. By spring, the internet no longer spoke of Daniel and Sarah as people. They were myth. Theories grew wilder. That they had been preserved as part of an indigenous ritual, which angered local native communities, who called it exploitative nonsense. That the glacier itself chooses victims to keep, returning them only when it wishes. That Daniel and Sarah had walked willingly into the ice, part of some pact. None of it was supported by evidence. All of it had spread faster than facts ever could. The most chilling rumor came from hikers who visited the glacier after the bodies were removed. They claimed to see faint impressions left behind, two hollow silhouettes in the ice, like molds waiting to be filled again. By summer 2022, Robert's obsession peaked. He purchased drones, mounted cameras along the Dalton Highway, and spent nights alone in the wilderness. He claimed he heard sound-slow hums, almost mechanical, emanating from beneath the ice. When he presented the recordings to investigators, they dismissed them as wind. Robert exploded, slamming his fist on the table. That's what they said 20 years ago. Wind. Always the wind. Elaine, meanwhile, began to slip further from reality. At Sarah's grave, she left food offerings. Once, she was found curled up beside the headstone, murmuring, "Stay warm, sweetheart. Don't go back to the cold." Family friends grew alarmed. "It's like the ice never let either of them go," one relative said. "Not Daniel, not Sarah, not their parents." Detective Fields, exhausted, delivered a quiet warning at a community meeting. "We have the bodies. We may never have the truth. And maybe that's what this place does. It swallows things whole and spits them back half digested. If you try to make sense of it too long, you'll end up lost in the ice yourself." Her words struck Robert like a challenge and Elaine like a curse. Both carried them differently, but both carried them heavily. The glacier had preserved Daniel and Sarah perfectly, but it had also preserved something else, a question that refused to melt. Robert sought answers in maps and theories. Elaine sought peace in graves and silence. Both, in their own ways, were unraveling, and through it all, the wilderness loomed cold, vast, and silent, indifferent to the madness it left in its wake. As one journalist put it, sometimes the ice doesn't just freeze bodies. It freezes the minds of those left behind. We close the saga with ambiguity, and dread leaving the mystery unresolved. The families broken, and the glacier looming like an eternal riddle. Summer 2023. 2 years after the discovery, the frenzy had cooled, at least in the media. Other stories took its place: wars, elections, celebrity scandals. But in Alaska, the shadow remained. The glacier that returned Daniel Whitaker and Sarah Miller had grown quiet again, a sheet of ancient ice brooding beneath northern skies. Yet for those touched by it, silence did not mean peace. Robert Whitaker no longer lived in Anchorage. He sold his house, drained his savings, and moved north, closer to the Dalton Highway. He rented a shack in Coldfoot, a town of fewer than 30 people. Locals called him the Watcher. Each day he drove to the pull-off where his son's truck was found. Each night, he set up his cameras, scanning the glacier with military precision. Journalists rarely came anymore, but one who did found Robert emaciated, his cheeks hollow, his eyes bloodshot. His shack was cluttered with maps and monitors, lines of string crisscrossing photographs like a spider's web. "People think the case is over," Robert rasped, pointing to a grainy photo of the glacier on his wall. "But the ice doesn't give everything back. It gave us the bodies. Sure. But what else is still down there? What else is waiting?" When asked if he had found anything, Robert hesitated. Then, in a whisper, "Sometimes at night, I see shapes in the ice. Not Daniel, not Sarah. Others, watching." Elaine Miller never spoke publicly again. She refused all interviews, all documentary requests, all calls from podcasters still chasing the story. Her world shrank to her daughter's grave and the four walls of her home. Neighbors saw her less and less. When she did appear, she seemed ghostly, herself pale, trembling, her eyes vacant. At the cemetery, visitors sometimes overheard her speaking softly, as if answering unheard questions. "Not yet, sweetheart," she murmured once, tracing the name carved in stone. "I can't follow you yet, but soon." Her family grew afraid she might not survive another winter. Officially, the case closed again in late 2022. The final report read simply, "Cause of death: hypothermia. Circumstances undetermined." But unofficially, a handful of investigators continued digging. Detective Karen Fields, who had once warned the community about being swallowed by the ice, kept the files in her basement. In a rare interview, she confessed, "We never found out why Daniel's watch stopped at 2:17. We never explained the last blank frame on Sarah's camera, and we sure as hell never explained how two bodies stayed that intact, side by side, 20 years in moving ice. Some things don't add up. They never will." She stared off after saying it, as if listening for something only she could hear. By 2023, the case had become campfire fodder. Truckers swapped embellished versions, the lovers who lay down in the ice, the pact made beneath the aurora, the glacier that chooses. Hunters told of hearing cracks at night, followed by muffled cries. A group of hikers claimed they saw faint silhouettes under the ice. Near where the bodies were recovered, 2 new outlines, as if the glacier had pressed replacements into its skin. None of it could be proven. None of it could be disproven. For outsiders, these were stories. For locals, they were warnings. Few camped near that glacier anymore. Michael Torres, the ex-detective Robert hired, released one last report before disappearing from public life. In it, he detailed anomalies. Soil samples near the truck showed traces of kerosene, suggesting someone had lit a fire there in 2001, but no burned wood or ashes were ever found. A pair of unidentified boot prints, logged but dismissed in the original investigation, matched neither Daniel's nor Sarah's shoes. Satellite archives indicated no major snowstorm the night they vanished, contradicting the theory that they were lost in sudden whiteout. Torres ended with a single chilling line: if the wilderness took them, it wasn't alone. In October 2023, Robert uploaded a video to a conspiracy forum. The footage was shaky, taken from one of his cameras trained on the glacier at night. For several minutes, nothing but wind and shifting snow, then faint lithe sound of cracking. The camera zoomed. In the ice, a blur of light like a reflection, but moving against the grain of the glacier. Then, briefly, 2 faint human shapes standing, not lying before vanishing back into the ice. The forum exploded. Some said it was doctored, others a trick of light, but Robert's accompanying message was stark. They're not gone. The ice is never empty. Weeks later, Robert stopped posting altogether. Neighbors said his shack was abandoned, his cameras left running. No one knew where he went. On Christmas Eve, a caretaker at the cemetery found Elaine collapsed beside Sarah's grave, clutching the bracelet she'd once given her daughter. She was alive but barely conscious, whispering, she's calling, she's calling." She survived. But after that night, she spoke to no one. Not even her sister. Not even her priest. By the end of 2023, the story had become something larger than Daniel and Sarah. It was a legend stitched into Alaska's long history of vanishings. The wilderness had given back 2 bodies, perfectly preserved, but withheld the truth, and in doing so, it preserved something else. Unease, the kind that grows like frost, slow and unstoppable. Investigators, families, locals saw left circling questions that refused to thaw. Why were they side by side? Why had the glacier revealed them on the anniversary of their disappearance? Why did their preservation look less like nature and more like intention? No answers came. Only silence. On some nights, when the aurora ripples across the sky, truckers say the glacier glows faintly, as if something moves beneath it. Shapes or tricks of the light. No one lingers long enough to find out. And somewhere in Fairbanks, in a house grown cold, Sarah's mother still whispers into the dark, "Stay warm, sweetheart. Don't go back to the ice." The wilderness, of course, does not answer. It never has. It never will.
Welcome to Horror Out.